Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Lunch and Learn with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights and the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. I'm Tiana Davis, the Outreach Specialist with the Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. With me as co-hosts today are Kyla Hannington, also from the Office of Human Rights, and Dr. Audrey Lau, the Adult and Senior Services Specialist with the library. Lunch and Learn, a joint partnership between the Office of Human Rights and the library system, has brought us interesting speakers and topics that help our mission of creating opportunities to build understanding across diverse peoples. We are honored to constantly be joined by such incredible guests, and we're excited to introduce you to today's Lunch and Learn guest, Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi. Hakeem Oluseyi is an American astrophysicist, cosmologist, inventor, educator, television personality, and public speaker. I'm sorry, I really thought I was going to mispronounce astrophysicist, so I'm really glad I got it out. But since 2007, he has been a professor of physics and space sciences at the Florida Institute of Technology and has served as Science Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. He appears regularly on the Science Channel's highly popular program, Outrageous Acts of Science, as well as other science shows produced by Discovery Inc. Welcome, Dr. Hakeem.
Thank you. And I have to update the career information. I'm now the CEO of America's first and oldest national astronomy organization. It's called the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. It's 136 years old. And I'm a visiting professor at Princeton and George Mason. And through my Princeton affiliation, I'm associated with the IMAP satellite, which is launching this fall, no earlier than September 23rd.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
I jump in. What does IMAP do?
So it is the Interstellar Mapping and Acceleration Probe. And so it looks at the sun and it looks at the magnetic bubble, the sun's magnetic bubble, the heliosphere that protects us from radiation entering our solar system. And it also looks at the region around that bubble, the local interstellar medium. So we get a good view of the interaction of our place in our solar neighborhood.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice. So you describe your path to astrophysics as anything but traditional. Can you tell us about your journey a little bit?
Yeah. Typically, when you think about someone who's an astrophysicist, you might imagine that they had a solid educational foundation. That was not exactly the case for me. There's an association with economic class and quality of education. And so I was, I did my education in the 70s and the 80s, my K through 12. And so the first part of that, the first decade from like the age of 4 to 14, I literally moved every year growing up between South Central Los Angeles, Houston 3rd Ward, New Orleans 9th Ward, New Orleans East, and rural Mississippi, which are all, not the highest economic destinations along our southern border. And from the age of 13 to 18, I was in rural Mississippi. And to give you an understanding, we all know, I think, where Mississippi ranks among the 50 states in education quality. And when Mississippi evaluated all of their schools early this century, 4 schools received a failing grade. 2 of them were my middle school and my high school. Right. So I'll give you another example. The average score on the ACT test in my senior year was a 7. And we were, that national average at the time was like around 14 or 15. And my class was a bumper crop, right? I mean, I scored, I think 30, which was like the record until my younger cousin broke it. And then, there were several in the teens, which were, above 14, like 4 or 5, which was unusual, but still the average was 7. We were a class of 70. And there were some juniors that also take it. So that's classified in there. But to say I had not a solid educational foundation, was a total understatement. Neither of my parents graduated high school. My older siblings had not graduated high school. And this March, I got my paternal family history back to the year 1700. It turns out it was all farmers, laborers. There were no, my family had been poor going back centuries. So here my little nerdy self comes along and breaks the trend. But it was a lot of, struggle to both, because the thing about about education is that even in most cases, in the middle class case, and when it comes to math and science, we are miseducated. I think that there is massive. I say it this way: if you're well educated in math by the time you graduate high school, it happens in one of only one or two ways. Way number one, it's in your house, right? Either a family member or somebody that you're around happens to be well educated in it. Way number two, which is still the same as way number one, you got lucky, right? So when I said I got these high scores on these tests, my lowest score by far was mathematics. It was half of the others. And because I read every book I could find, but teaching myself mathematics, even for a kid like me, was a near impossibility. You don't even know the goal you're shooting for, right? You don't even know what math is, right? Like I did a test over many years where I say, in one word, what is math about? And the number one answer that people give, if they're not like STEM professionals that are highly educated, they'll say numbers, right? And I'll say, okay, even in movies, right? When they talk about math, they'll use the word numbers to, as a substitute for math. And I was like, okay, well, think about your favorite physics equations. Force equals mass times acceleration. How many numbers are in that? None. E equals mc squared. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, characters, but only one number. Don't even get me started on like Maxwell's equations or thermodynamics. The S equals K logarithmic of omega, right? It's so we're miseducated. So it's not that you don't know, is that what you know ain't so. That's the problem. So, and not only that, when you step into the halls of higher education, you don't realize that you're stepping into a foreign language if you're from where I'm from, right? And if I stepped into a French or a Mandarin classroom, I would realize that it's a foreign language. But because I thought I was speaking the same language, that's a whole other barrier that you have to get through. And really, it takes a lot of luck. And so I say, and a lot of hard work. So I always say that I made it via hope, hustle, and help. And that help component is vital, because you don't know what you don't know. And you don't even know what the next step is to get to your goal, right? And so, now we have the internet and all these kind of things where you have more access to information. But in the world I grew up in, the 20th century, you didn't have access. So it was when I got to my graduate research group, 3 of the guys, their fathers were PhD physicists, right? One, his father was at CERN. Another, his father was at UC San Diego. Another, his father was from McGill University in Canada. So, if you look at the NBA now, right? There's a lot of guys whose dads were NBA players. So physics is kind of that way, being a physics researcher, it was sort of the same phenomenon. And here I'm stepping in there, it's just like, oh, when I saw and talked to these cats about their education, I was like, I lost this race before it even started, right? But you can work your way up to catching people and even surpassing them.
So I want to talk more about this. Like, I think this is really interesting. And I think about my own, like, I think I managed to I moved from Canada to the States. And so I was somehow able to do Bio 9. And then I never did another science class again. And I was like, I was proud of that. Which is crazy now. But 14-year-old Kyla was like, I'm out, and so. Talk to us about, you come out of this education system and then where did you go? Talk about a little bit about how you chose to pursue this research, this study, and where you went.
Right. So there's two things, I'm shaped by a few factors, right? And one of them, is just serendipity. And that is that because of the hardship of my childhood, I was, very abused and neglected, whereas most humans bond with other humans. Instead, I bonded with books, right? So even older people, when I met my adulthood, who knew me as a child, right? They were adults when I was a child. They would always tell me to, they're always joke about the same two things. One, that I was this little kid with a deep voice. And that the other one was that no matter what else was happening or how chaotic it got, I was always over in a corner somewhere with a book, right? And so what does that mean, right? So that means that I spent a lot of time by myself, just living in my mind. and reading books. And so I found myself in a situation when I was 10 years old where the only books that were around were a set of World Book encyclopedias that my mother had read. So I decided, hey, I'm going to read them from A to Z. And I get to E and I discovered Einstein. So just like many kids, I was into comics and everything magical and amazing, paranormal world, all this kind of stuff. And, I was also into the natural world. At this age, I had just spent a year in rural Mississippi where, we lived on a dirt road off a dirt road off a dirt road, running water in the house. I was at one with nature. You go take a bath in the pond, right? And, I love nature and I loved weird stuff. And I just love to learn. And when I discovered Albert Einstein and relativity, it was like the collision of nature and weirdness. And the fact that I had this hunger for knowledge, I vowed to myself immediately that I am going to learn how this works and understand it. And so, I had one of these, I was a latchkey kid, as they say. I didn't learn that phrase until long after I was no longer one. But my mom, she supported what I was into. So, she'd work double shifts. The shifts were like 3 to 11, 11 to 7, 7 to 11 to 7. Wait, 3 to 11, 3 to 11, 11 to 7, and 7 to 3, right? Yeah. The 7 to 3 were the people that were that had been there. They were the veterans of the job, right? So she was always the new person. So she was always working these shifts where I never saw her. But I'd come home and she would have gone to the local library or even, there were these salvage places. And she'd find, whenever she saw a book about Einstein or relativity, I'd come home and they'd be on the kitchen table. That for me was like Christmas, And eventually, personal computers come out. And I beg her for one. My girlfriend got one. My girlfriend, Anita Page. And it taught you the programming language BASIC. Came with a little book, a Radio Shack TRS-80.
It's like an Apple II GS. What are we talking about here?
No, the Radio Shack. Radio Shack.
Radio Shack. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so, I couldn't, me and Anita broke up. So I was like, Mom, go buy me one. So she found a secondhand one at Hezekiah Salvage. And I taught myself to program. And I was like, oh, I'll program relativity. And, these professors come by from the nearby university, an hour away, University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg. And they were doing outreach. They were like, hey, little poor kids here in this little undereducated school, there's this thing called science fairs. You guys should participate. And I was like, oh, I'll program relativity. And, our school had been given these IBM 5150 computers. And nobody knew, no teacher knew any. I was the sole DOS and BASIC expert at my school. So they let me take one home, and I used that. I ended up winning first place in the Mississippi State Science Fair.
That is awesome.
In 1985. Yeah. And so, but I went into the Navy first. And when I got in the Navy, my recruiter was, he was really gung-ho about me. And I signed up when I was 17. So I had to go into the recruiting station regularly and sit and talk with Senior Chief Gage. And he found this program for turning enlisted people into officers. And what they did, it was enlisted people who had promise but weren't educated, because being an officer meant you had to have a university degree, right? So this program, which was run by the Marines, so everything was Marine Corps style military, because Navy military style is pretty soft, right? Marine Corps military style, like climb that rope, like what? What if I fall? Then you fall. So I go in there, but I learned algebra. That we had a math class taught by this guy, Mr. Galuli, and he took us from arithmetic through calculus in 1 year. And right after when we started trigonometry, another thing that happened is I got properly diagnosed for the first time with this horrible skin condition I'd had for a long time, and it disqualified me for Navy service. So I got kicked out, right? Well, yeah, I got kicked out. And so what happened is I left the Navy. If you got medically kicked out of the program, you could request to leave the Navy. And so I leave. And now I know what my skin problem is. I'm still not destined to get proper treatment for another 7 years, but I had learned algebra. And so when I go home, I didn't know that college was for me. I didn't know, like I said, none of my parents graduated, around me. That wasn't, if you wanted to be a teacher, that was it. And a few people, not in my community, but, you'd hear about it would dare to think I'll be an attorney, right? And so none of that was in my head. But my buddies convinced me to go to Tougaloo College when they told me it was 7-1 female to male. And I was like, what? I'm in. And the guy, one of the main guys, there were three of them. One of the main ones, if you look him up, his name is George Darnell McDonald. He's been a reporter, a journalist in Selma, Alabama for many years. But they had a DJ crew, right? And I was also a musician, right? They rapped and DJ'd. And so I went and joined the Mac Boys crew. And guess what? On one day, this promoter shows up. It's like, we got a concert in Vicksburg. We need an opening act. It's these guys, the world-class wrecking crew. And so as a DJ, I didn't get to go. They just wanted the two rappers. And so they come back, Ice, who's Darnell McDonald, and Smooth, the other guy. Ice and Smooth were their names. And they're like, oh my God, because they didn't have any beats. All they had was raps. They were like, oh my God, we met this guy. He was so amazing. We rapped for him. He just made us beats right on the spot. His name was Dr. Dre. So I was this close to meeting Dr. Dre like back in 1987. So, but yeah, so it was from there, I get to college and I think, oh, smart people become medical doctors. I'm going to be chemistry pre-med. My second year, I hit organic chemistry. And it was like, I am not going to be chemistry pre-med. And then, 1988 hits and all hell breaks out, right? My girlfriend and I, she was 3 years younger than me. We get pregnant. I do my first research program where I didn't know research was a thing. My professor recommended me for this program and they accepted me without me even knowing. Professor McGinnis, he just passed away. And he paid for me to go there when I didn't even have money to go to Georgia, right? Professor McGinnis paid for me to go. And right before I went, I put it, plainly hit a crack pipe for the first time, right? And when I get back from that summer, I am pretty well along the road to addiction and I drop out of college. And I'm working as a janitor. And, one day my big break, I'm making $4 an hour, which, wasn't bad because the minimum wage was $3.35, right? So I'm making $4 an hour, but, I'm bringing home just under $100 a week, right? It was hard times. I had to when I got to the hotel, I would walk through the halls to see where people put their room service tray outside their door so I could eat their leftovers. It was hard living. And this bellhop gets fired. So I think this is my big break. And I apply for the bellhop job and don't get it. And I'm just like, oh, Lord, is this my life? Really? I can't go from janitor to bellhop. I better go back to college. And as soon as I do, this woman from MIT shows up, Cynthia McIntyre. And she was talking about, she was trying to recruit students to enter the graduate school in physics. And I was, as a STEM major, I knew I had to take intro to chemistry, intro to physics, intro to biology. So I happened to be in the physics class at that time. And they talked about this physics thing. And what I didn't know is that because of my Einstein obsession, I had done so much physics for fun. And because of my mother, she loved to do crosswords and she'd buy these Dell crossword puzzle books. She would do the crosswords. I would do everything else. And what I didn't understand was I was training myself in logic, right? Yeah. And so I go to MIT and discover that if you show up for this conference, you can make a profit on the travel reimbursement, right? And you get to hang out with a bunch of other college students from around the country. That's why I was going. And in 1990, I think, the astronaut Fred Gregory spoke. And so at this time, I'm farther along down my path of physics, and I'm busting straight A's in my physics classes. And by the way, I never went to class. Personally, I never met a class I didn't like. Anybody tells me you need to be here at that time, you're a pain in my ass. I don't want to do it, right? So I never attended classes for any class, but for physics, I could just show up for the exams and I'm busting 100%, right? My professor would joke that he no longer had to make a key, right? Oh, my son is even worse. I tell him, I'm like, dude, I hated cats like you in college, like, because I educated him, right? So now, that's me not educated performing that way. My son, highly educated now, it all comes easy. But anyway, I was farther along, and Fred Gregory gives this really stirring talk about the value of physics to the world, how it could, how we're needed, and pursue this thing called a PhD. And at that conference, there were graduate school recruiters. So I started, talking to the ones who people pointed out as being friendly for folks from not ideal situations. All right. And one of them was Stanford, right? And Stanford had graduated 30 Black PhDs in physics between 79 and 89. Because look up William Shockley, the eugenicist, was on their faculty, and they were looking to repair their reputation, right? This guy is talking about, there's no even need to try to educate Black folks. They're just incapable, right? That was his, he would say this stuff on interviews. You can find him on YouTube today. So I was the last person that was brought in under that program. And when I applied to graduate schools, I applied to 10. I'd learned graduate school was a thing. I learned research was a thing. And every school where I knew someone, from either doing summer research there or meeting them at that conference, everyone where they knew me, I was accepted. Everyone where they didn't know me personally, I was rejected, right? And one of the ones that accepted me happened to be Stanford. And I didn't even know that Stanford was this highfalutin school. I knew they were Black friendly. And so when I started getting my few acceptance letters, what decided the school I attended was the stipend they were going to give me. And Stanford offered me $14,290 a year. So they won. The others are coming in around 11,000, right? So I'm like, 14,000. Oh my God. That just sounded insane, right? I'm rich. Little did I know. And then I get to Stanford, and every year they try to kick me out for my first 4 years. So there you go.
That is awesome. Thank you. It was really, I'm so grateful that you took the time to take us through this, because one of the things is we have lots of regular viewers who we are so grateful for, but there's a couple of different teachers that bring their classes tune in. Yeah. And they're tuning in now. And so it's like we've got young people here to hear, to hear a journey from someone who maybe it didn't take like a traditional path, right? And the things that you're doing now. And I won't belabor. I'm going to give it back to Tiana, but I'm so grateful that you took the time. And I hope for people listening, it's like just to recognize that you can find that passion in yourself and that things are possible.
And students, if you're listening, know that your parents, your teachers, your leaders of community and corporations and all this, they did the same things I did because they've confessed it to me, okay? They just don't tell you, all right? So you're going to make mistakes. It doesn't mean you've, edited yourself out of going for your dreams, right? It is not the bad things that you do. And, if they're sufficiently bad, like I say, like I got incarceration as a part of my family, a part of my friend circle. And the only difference between them and me is they got caught and I didn't. Right, for the things I did in my youth, you're right, and it labels you. But sometimes you do things, So, for example, I would, okay, this might be too much, but I come show up somebody's dorm, like, hey, let's get high. And they're like, oh no, I got to work. I'm like, I didn't say don't work. I'm gonna get high and work. I'm gonna do both, right? and I never, in my mind, I never saw why, growing up in rural Mississippi, work ethic was drilled into you. And the biggest insult that they could give you, especially as a man, but also to women, was he don't want to work. If they said that about you, you were what they call no account, right? You're no good. We got no use for you. You got to get out of here, right? And so that, hard work overcomes a lot. And if you don't put in the hard work, and I used to think to myself, how do I know when I'm working hard? If it doesn't hurt, I'm not working hard. If I'm not pushing myself beyond if you look at how athletes work out, right? You'll see a football team practicing so hard that guys are reduced to puking. The same thing would happen when I was in the military, right? You got to study till you puke, right? That's what hard work really is. If you're feeling decent, you're not working hard, right? If it's not hurting, you're not working hard. And so there's a professor in South Africa who, he said this to me years ago. He's like, yeah, Hakeem, I would like to talk to you because, a lot of people say they work hard, but that means different things to different people, right? And there's a lot of people saying they're working hard, but they don't really realize where that level is. And, I'm the type of dude who was, especially when I got to Stanford, where everybody seemed to be better educated than me. I was like, you all may be better educated than me, but can't nobody in here outwork me. So I'm like, when you're partying, I'm working. And that's exactly what I did. And hey, it worked out.
I actually want to ask questions about two things that you mentioned. The first one, I want to go back to your days at Stanford.
Yeah.
Because, in your memoir, you mentioned that there was this one particular professor who had it out for you, for reasons.
Yeah.
And he tried really hard to keep you from getting your master's and your PhD.
Yeah.
And I just out of curiosity, I Googled him.
Yeah.
And if it's the same one that I Googled, he's still there.
Yep.
Like, how does that feel for you? Or are you just like, does it just not even matter anymore?
Well, I'll tell you another thing that happened is that particular professor, after I left, shortly after I left, there was a couple of women. If anybody ever watched my old show, Outrageous Acts of Science, she was a co-star there. Her name is Deborah Berebichez, but she was one of two women that this same guy attempted to kick out. And it was so blatantly a violation of the rules that the students, just like mine was, when nobody would come to my defense, hear me, young men. and so the students got together, did a letter writing campaign, attorneys got involved, and they were like, admit these women into candidacy immediately, and you can no longer serve in these roles, these gatekeeper roles. And no, I don't expect the world to be fair, and I don't expect the world to. I have a so what attitude. I could be born anywhere and anytime. And, I've been to 44 countries. I worked a lot in the developing world. I grew up in, when Mississippi was the developing world. In the 90s, a lot of America got, the infrastructure expanded and reached a lot of these parts that it had never reached before. And, just by being American, you already have so many advantages in life. Clean water everywhere, air conditioning everywhere, food abundance. If you're not in a homeless situation, chances are you're in the top 99, 98% of the world in terms of opportunity and that. So, there's levels to hardship, and I'm not one to complain, right? I'm one I need to handle this situation, right? I could have been born what if I was born instead of 1967, 1767, right? What am I going to do then? Handle the situation. That's what I'm going to do, right? So I don't think about that. Success is the best revenge. And people like that, I kind of thank them in a way, because, as a mentor, sometimes you got to know what's the best thing for this person in front of me. Is it encouragement or is it a kick in the butt, right? Because the worst thing you can tell me is, I don't think you can. And my attitude has always been like, what? I'll show you. Right? Not everybody responds that way. I think most people don't, right? From what I've seen, most people get discouraged, but I react the exact opposite, right? If you think, hey, you want to FAFO.
My second question, I'm actually going to switch gears because you just mentioned mentorship, and I know your mentor meant a lot to you. Yeah. How do young people especially, who are looking to get into the sciences, especially physics and astrophysics, how do they find a mentor? Like, what is that process like, finding a mentor? And
yeah, it depends on your age, right? So if you're under 18, you're pretty much locked in most of the time to local people, right? Because you want to be in person, right? I get people reach out to me all the time from around the world. Hey, can you mentor me? Excuse me, I got to sneeze. Sorry about that. That's not really that effective. Like, you can be encouraging to people, and that matters, right? Sometimes people at a critical moment where just somebody seeing them, hearing them, being there for them is what gets them to continue to that next day, right? When they're at that point, right? I was certainly there several times. But a lot of things are that a lot of stuff is difficult, and when it's difficult, you need to get with those who do it at the top level and understand. Because one of the things about our education system, and I just don't understand, is that we teach things wrong first and then right later. Like, oh yeah, let me tell you the truth. Now here's how you really do it. For one thing, for example, if you go to science classes and science labs, students have to do a lab report. And that lab report has this academic lab report format. that format doesn't show up anywhere else in the professional world. But the way that reports are done in the professional world per field is pretty standardized. So if I got physics students, why am I teaching them this academia lab report thing instead of teaching them here's how physicists actually write their reports? And so that's when I became a professor, that's exactly what I did. I'm like, okay, look, I don't want to see no Microsoft Word and Excel, right? You're doing everything in Python and LaTeX, and you're going to do it like a professional. And my students would always come back to me like, oh my God, thank you. Because these techniques, the reason why they're the professional techniques is because they're so much more efficient and so much more, you can iterate to perfection more easily, right? So, whereas students are, you write a little Python code to analyze your data, and well, now we got AI, so that blows all that out of the water. But you write a little Python code, and you don't even have to look at your data, and wow, your answers come out, beautiful plots. You put it in Excel, you'll be there day after day, trying to make it happen. So I forgot what your question was, as I told you what happened.
So like, what are some misunderstood things about you and your career and your background that you get a lot? I know we touched a bit on it backstage, where I was like, yeah, you were very different than what I assumed you would be like.
Yeah, so a lot of the people that don't know me know me. They will have seen me on television, and I have to speak to be understood. Like when I showed up at Stanford University at 24 years old, no one could understand me. And if I took you home right now, which I do, I take you back home to Mississippi, and the same thing always happened. After like a day, they'll say, Hakeem, do you really understand these people, or are you faking it, right? Because we speak so fast, no consonants, we drop the ends off words, a TH at the end of the word becomes an F. It's its own thing. And so, when I was a young cat, and living in a segregated world, you look at people who spoke the way like Colin Powell speaks, or even the way I speak now, and you classify them as what we call whitewashed, right? And you assume something about their childhood, like you didn't grow up in this kind of community, to shape you to speak that way. You wasn't around us, you were around them, right? Is how it was framed mentally. But look, if you want to come from a foreign country and do business, you have to speak the standard language of business, right? And so that's where I found myself. It's not everybody must, adjust to me. I have to fit into that system, right? That pre-exists me, that is set up. And so when people come up to me, they're like, dude, I had no idea. If they read my memoir, dude, I had no idea. I thought you were, and they paint this picture, like the Wayans brothers used to make fun of Byron Allen, right? In that way, right? Then, turns out Byron Allen ain't who they thought he was. And so, these surface level, evaluations and thinking like this, they're that's not really how the world, that's not really setting yourself up to be successful. Don't listen to Dr. Umar, right? You're gonna, isolation is not a winning strategy. Not being adaptable is not a winning strategy. The more allies you have, the more adaptable you are, the more resilient you are, right? The more you're able to fight through. And also the more you're able to accept who you are and what you are, and let your creativity flow, and realize, like it's so, if you look at how much of communication, people have an expectation of hostility. Just looking at rap, they're like, hey, you better not step to me. Like, why do you even have an expectation that that's what's going to happen? Because that's the world you're living in, right? That's not the world of business. Right, the world of making it happen and getting things done is a completely different mind frame. And the faster you can get into that mind frame of working with other people, adapting to the situation, steadily learning, letting your creative, being a conduit to let your creative juices flow, and also understanding the long game and committing yourself to the process, and knowing, the machine that a human being is. The more you throw at it, the stronger it becomes. There's nothing that you can't learn. It's just a matter of getting in those reps, doing that time, and having the best guide you can possibly get, Can't hear you, Audrey.
One of the things I struggled with in school was math, and I really enjoyed it a lot. It was kind of like solving a puzzle, but and I found out like geometry was so fun. But one of the things I wanted to kind of like touch on is I didn't take a math course after high school because I was slow at it. Like I straight ate it, but I was slow. And so I guess one of the things, if you could talk a little bit to the students here, because math is always the hardest subject. It's traditionally, like, especially in poorer areas like title, schools and things like that I went to, math was hard. And if you didn't know how to do it, if you couldn't get into it, it was like you shy away from it.
That's right. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how to kind of help someone get some self-esteem in that, and also not be afraid of it? Because I know like you say the word calculus and I'm like, oh my, please, I didn't even get that far.
And you know why? It's made harder than it really is one problem, and so the way calculus is taught is also completely ridiculous. We teach, once you get to, like, I have a son, my son, I homeschooled him up to age 10. He's 19 now, about to turn 20. He completed Algebra 1 at 7, Algebra 2 and Trig at 9, started calculus at 10. And basically, the one thing that was important for me to teach him was how to teach yourself. Because, when I got to Stanford, another thing I learned is when you go to those classes, they're not teaching you. That is not, every other class I'd ever been in, it was like, oh, you don't know this, so I'm going to teach it to you. That's not their expectation of their students, right? Their expectation is that you are self-learning. So what they're doing in that classroom, it's a completely different thing than what you're accustomed to. And so I would say, hey, take this textbook, boom, do half the problems in the chapter problems, right? It's up to you to read it. And I'm doing this when he was like 6 years old, okay? Right? Because the sooner you're doing it, the more it becomes your natural way of being, right? And, when you're 10, you're like, I don't understand how people don't get this. It's so easy. It really is, right? That's the thing. We've been so miseducated around it. We've been so misdirected around it that, like, I'll give you an example. Really simple. If I walked up to a person on the street and I say, yo, random person, what's 2x squared y cubed z plus 3x squared y cubed z? Their answer is going to be, get out of my face, nerd. But if I say, hey, what's 2 tigers plus 3 tigers? They're going to say 5 tigers or 5, right? Not realizing those are the same 2 problems. But when you hear that word, so I'll go into classrooms, young kids, and I'll say, hey, what's 2 eggs plus 3 eggs? 5 eggs. What's 2 refrigerators plus 3 refrigerators? 5 refrigerators. What's 2 galaxies plus 3 galaxies? 5 galaxies. What's 2xy plus 3xy? 5xy. But then if I say that in like 6th grade or up, the second I say xy, they're like, huh? What? You can't do that. Exact same problem, right? But the way we teach it, it's, we frame mathematics around numbers until our students are like 13, 14 years old. And education is like, oh, we're not just have you memorizing tables anymore. We're creating these situations where you got to think. But still, at the end of the day, you're just doing numbers. There's nowhere where you have classrooms of 10-year-olds solving equations, which is what you really do all day, every day when you're in the STEM world, right? So why not start doing that when you're 9 years old? Why wait till you're 13, 14? So when you wait that long and you throw it at them, your mind is completely not framed correctly to see the easiness of it, right? So students, it's just a resiliency thing. It's a don't quit thing, right? It's what I see in life is that most people don't fail, they quit. As long as you're fighting, you're in the game, you're in the battle, right? If you're not getting it, chances are you're not going to get it on your own. All right. So I'll give an example. I showed up to Tougaloo College and I tested into Trig, pre-calculus 2. I got a C. Get to calculus 1, C. Calculus 2, C. Calculus 3. That's when my addiction started. I dropped out. My transcript says WF, withdraw failing, right? So what does that say? I had never gotten a grade better than a C. Then I decide I'm going to do every problem in the calculus book. And me and this woman, Francesca Wilkins, every night after dinner, because, you know, we ate at the cafeteria. We went to the Kinchlow Hall and we did every problem in the calculus book. Before that, the highest grade I got in the math class was C. After that, the lowest grade I got in the math class was an A, right? Math is really a simple thing that's been made hard. And the way of practicing to master it is no different than playing Mario Kart. Who doesn't suck when you sit down and play Mario Kart, right? You're all over the place, right? But you practice it, and next thing you know, Rainbow Road, I'm dope. Math is the exact same way, but you often need help. So at Tougaloo, it was Francesca Wilkins. When I got to Stanford, it was Rakesh Nigam. After that, it was a dude named David Santiago, right? I needed a translator. None of those people I just named were professors, right? They were my peer student who they could see through it, and I worked with them. And a big problem that we have is that people suffer from embarrassment, and you don't want to display your ignorance, right? If you don't display your ignorance before the test, you're going to display your ignorance on the test, right? So know that in the learning process, display your ignorance. Until this day, anytime I stepped into a lab, they were using words. I stepped in the Berkeley lab, we're trying to attenuate the signal. I'm like, what the hell is attenuate? You know, I didn't have a cell phone to look it up, right? And so, you know, there's a lot inside yourself emotionally that works against you to keep you from fighting through these battles, right? You know, it hurts. It's painful, right? Internally, mentally, emotionally. But you got to learn to live in that pain and move forward. And so, like I said, when I got to the point of recognizing that if it ain't hurting, I'm not working hard, that pain is the feeling of weakness leaving the body, as they say, right? And you just got to work through it. It's part of the process. You know, most people are not lucky. Most people don't have it in their house, right? So you got to fight through the pain to get there. That's the only way. You know, LeBron, you know, he still got to practice his ass off. He still got to work out like crazy, even though he's boring LeBron, right? You know, yeah, they're gonna eat you up if you're, you know, because somebody is working that hard. Somebody is doing that.
I am so glad that you mentioned the part about not being afraid to ask questions, or being afraid to ask questions but asking them anyway.
Ask them anyway. You got to do it anyway. Yeah.
I went back to university to do my undergrad when I was 35, and I was like, okay, I want to be the oldest, fattest, and stupidest person on campus, and it was really scary. No, I was like, serious. I was really scared. Yeah. But then I got in there, and the benefit of being the oldest, fattest, stupidest person on campus, once you accept it, is that then things would happen in class, and I would just be like, I don't know what that means. And I had exactly that same thing, and it completely transformed my experience. So I'm really glad that you highlighted that. I want to talk. We had a great
the one who talks is the one who wins. You got to talk. You got to make personal relationships, because if you go like this is something that happened to me. There was this when I got to Stanford, I had to take partial differential equations. It's tough as it sounds. And we had this professor who's like right out of casting 101, right? Short Jewish dude, mathematician with a New York accent, the twill jacket with the things, right? And first semester, I get a C+, all right? Which at Stanford, you know, that might have been a D anywhere else, right? So after that, I started going into his office and talking to him. Cause I'm like, dude, help me. And oh, no, I don't. I started doing it at the end of the first semester. And he's like, you should have come in here and talked to me a long time ago, because I see what you know now. I didn't understand, you know, on paper, on these exams, you didn't illustrate what you knew. And now I see how your mind works and how you know. The next semester, I perform pretty much identically, but I get a B+. Because I had that line of communication with him, right? The same thing happens with my students, right? You know, I'm like, you're an adult. You don't have to come to my class if you don't want to. I'm never taking roll. But understand this. You get no sympathy at the end of the year. You know, never show up. Don't talk to me and be like, oh, no. But if you've been like making a relationship with me and I see, it's not the nature of the relationship, it's the fact that I'm interacting with your mind to have a way of, you know, you're making judgment calls about this person, right? And, you know, what are you going to grade on? There's 3 things to grade on. One thing is that the number that comes out, right? The performance. Another thing is the effort that you think the student has put in. A third thing is the growth that the student undergoes, right? So if you go from being an F student to a C student, do I give you a C? right? If you show up there at an F, no, I'm not going to give you something. I'm going to give you a B.
Yeah.
You know, I'm gonna add points for growth. I'm gonna add points for effort.
Yeah. We have a lot of questions, but we have some from our viewers, and so I'm just gonna take a second and ask there's great questions here. I'm gonna.
What is my favorite squirrel recipe?
Yeah, that'd be right up. But first, how do racism, poverty, and exclusion shape access to STEM careers? This is a big question.
Okay, so I'll tell you this. The thing about racism. So I grew up in completely segregated environment in Mississippi, and I was subject to race violence in Louisiana, not in Mississippi. Also, my first experience in Athens, Georgia, University of Georgia. Every time I walked down this one street, people yelled the N-word at me, threw stuff at me. One of the biggest problems of racism is not what people do against you, because remember, it's up to you to survive. So I'm talking to you, right? And how you survive. Mm-hmm. Not looking to place blame, because that's irrelevant, right? Your expectation, if you experience racism, so I used to say that, you know, I developed a racist radar, right? Because I don't want to interact with you. I don't want to get my feelings hurt, right? I don't want to find myself where I feel a certain way. And so one of the ways that would trigger my racist radar is if someone spoke to me like they had a sense of superiority or they were looking down on me. Well, guess what? In these elite environments, there's a lot of people talk like that to people, but they're not racist. They're just assholes. Right? Yeah. But thinking of it one way impacts your psyche a different way.
Right.
So if you can remove the expectation of racism from your psyche, you perform better.
Yeah. Right.
And so another thing I realized is how I had been trained, right? How I had been trained. And I thought about it, and questioned it just like this. And I was like, I've been trained to, if somebody uses a particular word, I'm supposed to get angry and even get violent. And I was like, why? Isn't that their problem? That ain't my problem. If I escalate this situation, it could go any number of directions that are out of my control, right? And, I don't want to be subject to control by another person anyway, right? So I'm the type of dude, I love to compete, play basketball. And so, I was good, I was physical, but I'm not LeBron. So there's always going to be somebody bigger, better. So my way of dominating you is mentally, right? And so I'm going to combat you. I'm going to take you out of whatever you thought was about to happen. That's not what's about to happen. And you're going to be so surprised by what's going to come out of my mouth or how I react to the situation. That's going to completely throw you off your narrative and agenda, right? And so that's how I typically work with people. But yeah, let me tell you, what racism, sexism, these kind of things, they are conveniences for people. People, sort of like take Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, all right? Barack Obama becomes president, and the criticisms, a lot of them are going to be of a racial nature. Why? Because it's easy. Hillary Clinton runs, a lot of them are going to be of a misogynistic. Why? Because it's easy. People want to impact you the same way. They want to take you off your game the same way. They want to impact your mental state, right? So how do you create Fortress Me, right? You can't, I'm setting my agenda. You're not setting my agenda. That's one form of racism. The other form where it really matters is what's called discrimination. So when you're in the environment of a young person, you got to go through a lot of gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers are particularly, there's a crowd at the gate. And the first thing they need to do is eliminate people. And they're trying to do it the easiest way possible, right? So I don't care who you are, where I'm from, unless you're just a complete weirdo like me who just lived in books nonstop, the education system is not going to prepare you to be competitive with people from these other systems. So when you apply, the easy thing to do is look at this application, look at that application. Oh, they got this on the SAT, they got that out, right? In the end, what you're going to find is that people from particular communities, geographical regions, right area, they're the ones who are all out. These people whose parents did it, they're all in. It looks like these are qualified and these are less qualified, but that's not what it is. What should we really be judging on, right? You don't judge resilience in that way. You don't judge grit in that way. You don't judge intelligence in that way. You don't judge learning ability in that way, right? Like as a student, you go take a test. That never happens in life. Before I put something out, we go back and forth on it a million times, right? The latest book I'm writing, I didn't write an essay and submit it to the editor. No, I submitted my finished manuscript in July of 2024, right? I just got done with the edits working with 2 other people this week, right? You iterate to perfection working with others. So these gatekeepers are dealing with false situations. And not only that, now you're interacting with your peers. The kind of dynamics I was talking about earlier, that's those peer-to-peer interactions that make you feel bad. Then not only that, what's the probability that there is going to be somebody above you who's classist, racist, elitist, whatever, right? 1 out of 100 is enough, because that one person says to you, maybe this ain't for you, right? That hits your impact way harder than the 99 who say, oh, you're good at this, right? And so you got to remember, right? Remember that it's on you. So I'll give you another example. Remember me talking about I could outwork everybody? My first job I got out of graduate school was in Silicon Valley. When I show up on Saturday night to work, guess who else was there? The Chinese, the Koreans, the Indians, right? They weren't, you know who wasn't there? The Americans, right? So I created a phrase that I called immigrant hustle. And I realized that's coming out of my environment in Mississippi, I had immigrant hustle, because the consequences for me failing was that I was going back to being the janitor who couldn't move up to bellhop, right? And so, you know, if you're sufficiently comforted and you're well fed, you may quit because you don't have that desperation in you. But don't let racism stop you. Don't let sexism stop you. And people say this kind of thing over and over, and I always thought, whatever, is that, you know, well, you know, if you didn't get this opportunity, it wasn't the right one for you. Man, let me tell you, I've lost so much. Like I don't know if I'm a winner or a loser, because I've lost way more than I win. But people only see the wins, right? So if I wasn't still shooting my shot, if I was quitting after losses, like I'll give you an example. Starting a decade ago, I started getting invitations to be the CEO of this, the vice president of that, the dean of this. Every time I came in second place. Every single time until 2024. Right. Right. You know, so you gotta, you know, those weren't the one for me. They weren't the right one for me. So, you know, the real way that that stuff impacted me was, one, my mental framing had to change. Once I learned to deal with people as individuals and not see the white people or the see people as their group, but see them as an individual, then I can interact with them as an individual. Now suddenly I have all these assets, right? Because people are your greatest assets. And that's what you need. You need a toolbox. Like my buddy Mackey, what's his name? Calvin Mackey down in New Orleans. His brother is Falcon, right? From the Iron Man. He's an educator. He runs STEM NOLA. He says you need 3 things. You need a mindset, a skill set, and assets. And assets are other people. Right. So don't let the color of their skin, their, you know, and if you are one of these people who are better off, guess what makes you better? When you teach others. Like all of us, you know, you get your bachelor's in physics. Oh, I think I know physics. You get to graduate school, you learn you don't. Right. Then, you know, you pass your qualification. Oh, I really know physics. But it's when you start teaching the stuff, you're like, oh, man, it's kind of like, you know, sometimes there's a song you knew from childhood. And there's lyrics you never quite understood. Then suddenly one day they're clear as light to you. Bling! Like, oh, how did I never hear that? I never caught that. I remember one for me was that song by what's his name? The dude from Goody Mob.
CeeLo?
Huh?
CeeLo?
CeeLo, yeah. What's the song where he's talking about the woman and he ain't got enough money?
I'll Be Around.
No, it was his biggest hit. But anyway, there's a little like background statement in the song I had never heard. I was like, I never heard that before, right? It's just saying it rhymed with figure, but it was in the background singers. But it's funny when you hear it and understand it. But yeah, you know, you just got to keep going. Don't let this world, don't let the ism stop you. You know, you're not your ancestors. This is not, you're not in chains. You're not, you know, at dogs. There's no water hoses on you. you know, if you look at what they did, we got no excuses, right? My feelings hurt. How soft are you? How brittle are you? You know, Uncle Hakeem gonna be honest with you, right? You can't be soft and brittle. You got to be, if you're gonna make it in this world, you got to act like you're trying to make it in this world.
Sorry. So we are running a little low on time, and I know we didn't get to talk much about science and astrophysics. So can you give us some fun facts about stars or galaxies or exoplanets or anything, something that'll just blow everyone's minds?
Oh my God! Who do you think I am, Neil deGrasse Tyson? Let's see here. You know, well, I'll tell you one thing that I was yikes thinking about is so this book I was writing, I was trying to lay out a path, a way of visualizing the universe as a whole. And so one of the things that occurred along my education is I developed the ability to see the sky in 3D, right? So if you know the size of the moon relative to the size of the Earth is 1/4 the size, and you know how far away it is relative to the size of the Earth, like 65 Earth radii away, you know, just because, like now, if you see a person in the distance, you know about how big a person is. So even though they're tiny in the distance, you really see the human in their real size in your mind because you have that perspective. Well, when you do that with the moon, you're like, whoa, that sucker is massive, right? And then with the other planets, it's the same thing. And so I started thinking to myself, like, well, how about my makeup, right? So we're made up of atoms. And atoms, all their mass is concentrated in their nuclei. But the nucleus is only 1/100,000th the size of the atom. So that means that the atoms are a few 100,000 times their own size apart from each other, right? So if I'm, say, 2 meters tall, right, 100,000 meters will be 100 kilometers away from me, right? So if humans were distributed like the nuclei in your body, the nearest human to you would be like 50, 60 miles away, right? So you're mostly empty space. Take that up to the next level, stars, right? Stars are typically, like the sun is about 2 light seconds across. The nearest star is a few light years away. There's 30 million, pi times 10 to the 7, 30 million seconds in a year. That means that stars are tens of millions of times their own size away from each other. All right. So going back to my example, that means that the next human closest to you, 10 million meters away, is 10,000 kilometers. So you're not even on Earth anymore, right? So how far, if your nuclei are hundreds of thousands of their own size apart from you, and stars are tens of millions of times their own size apart from each other, how far apart from each other do you imagine galaxies are? These big giant galaxies. Some really big number? No. The Andromeda galaxy is only 13 Milky Ways away. Galaxies are pretty close to each other. They're like 10 to 100 times their own size apart. So that means the next human would be 10 meters away from me, right? They're in the same room. And so I was like, what exists like that in our world? You know what else is about 10 to 100 times their own size apart from each other? Air molecules. So the universe of galaxies is like air, right? In its distribution. But here's the thing. There's about 400 billion galaxies in the observable universe. What volume of air is about 400 billion air molecules? A cubic millimeter. Yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah. So to a being that's like, you know, a few 100,000 times the size of the observable universe, our universe is like a cubic millimeter of air to them, you know, our observable universe. Yeah. So I don't know. That blows my mind. I don't know if it's.
Yeah.
I am sorry, Tiana, but I've heard, okay, so back to the space and the air in the human body, like, shouldn't we be able to walk through walls, right? Because if we have so much molecule, right?
No, there's one word that prevents it.
Okay.
And that word is "and." So the way it works is, yeah, every proton, electron has a probability of going through, right?
Right.
But the question is, what's the probability of this one and that one and that one and that one and that one? And you're talking like 10 to the 27 particles or something. right? And you're talking about each one has a fraction of, say, let's say it has a probability, a big probability, 0.1%, right? Once you multiply that by itself by 10 to the 27 times, you get 10 to the minus 28, which is virtually zero.
So
right?
I'd have to try it. I'd have to try it a lot of times.
No, you got to do like the like Flash. You got to vibrate at just the right frequency, or you need to get a infinity stone in your forehead. Then you could, that'll help.
So unfortunately, we are out of time. We kept you a little bit over your time. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, I'm gonna quadruple, just like the contract said. I'm quadrupling the fee y'all paying me. All right.
Love that. It has been an honor to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking this time to join us today, Dr. O. It has been so fantastic. For those of you tuning in,
wait a minute. When do I get to do my plugs?
Do it now.
All right. Look up my podcast with Roddenberry Entertainment, creators of Star Trek. My co-host, Tamara Krinsky. It's called Does It Fly? You can find it on YouTube.
It's called It Doesn't Fly?
Does it fly? Does it fly? Yeah.
She's going to put links in the chat.
Yeah. All right. And you get my memoir. There's the young adult version and the adult version.
Available at the library.
Yeah, or for money. And
but they're going to buy the new
book. And if you
book.
want to listen to me read it, you can get the audiobook.
And Audrey's already put links in the chat for those people viewing at home. If you're watching live right now, if you look at the chat where you're watching, Audrey put some links earlier in the program to both the teen version and the adult version of the memoir. I shouldn't say adult version of the memoir, but the non-teen version of the memoir.
Right.
And you're also doing stand-up. Do you have any shows lined up?
No. I told you they stopped me from doing stand-up for now, so that's coming back. Yeah.
Nice. So we'll keep an eye out for
TBD.
that. Yeah. So those of you tuning in, whether you're joining live or watching on demand later, thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. You are why we do what we do. And we hope you enjoyed this great chat today and hope you can join us at some of our upcoming events. Tonight, we are at Mixed Food Hall in Mount Rainier for our monthly Solidarity Stories book group, which honors Pride Month tonight by discussing On Earth, We Are Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. Tomorrow night, join us virtually for an Empowering the Game special event. We'll be talking to 4-time Paralympian Trevon Jennifer. And next week's Lunch and Learn features Mike Curato on his brand new graphic novel, Gaysians. These are going to be great events, and you can learn more about them and all that we do by going to the Office of Human Rights website at civilrights.mypgc.us and by visiting the library's website at pgcmls.info/events. Thank you again so much for being here, Dr. O. It has been an absolute pleasure, and goodbye to everyone else. We'll see you next time.